Made some good progress this week. Um, had been working on the foot shells. Here's one of them just because I'm out of space out here, so I didn't bother bringing the second one out. I got previous video, I glued the side piece here on. I've done a little sanding to it. I am going to need some filler. It's not quite perfectly lined up, but it's pretty darn close. I'm happy with it, how it turned out. Side panel on, held on with magnets. And then battery boxes. I got work done on the battery boxes. Now, printing these battery box tops was really hard for me. You can see here 2 pieces. Originally, they're only one. And if you look inside here, you can see how, what a challenge it is to print these, because whether you print them in this orientation or this orientation, you're going to need a bunch of support material to be able to print either. If these are on the print bed, you need support material all in here so you can span this wide gap. If you print this area on the bed, you need some support material for this lip and support material for inside here and inside these protrusions here, which these are actually made so you can screw the fittings for the battery cable hoses into, so they're threaded. So getting those to print was just killing me. So what I ended up doing was taking the model of this part into mesh mixer and chopping it in half. I cut it right at the boundary here of where this flat piece starts. So this flat piece belongs to this upper part, and then this piece here with the lip that attaches to the battery box, that was just a hollow oval ring. So that piece I printed upside down so that I didn't need any support material, because it's just flat here, and then there's a lip here printed in this orientation, was no problem at all. And then this piece, the whole bottom is flat except for both sides here where it's raised up. Those I added support material in and tried to do just enough support material that I would be able to break it away and still have usable threads on that side. And this side didn't really matter that much. So I eventually got that to work and then glued the 2 halves together. Now this one has quite a bit of gap. It's probably taller than it needs to be because of that. The pieces didn't fit really close together, maybe because I don't remember what I used, honestly, to glue that together, but it might have been epoxy, which is responsible for the large gap. Also, if you can see an odd texture to the top, I was having an under extrusion problem at the same time that I didn't realize. This is just before one of the times when I had a nozzle blockage, so this piece didn't get quite thick enough filament, so it looks a little bit odd, but filler material will take care of that, no problem. So basically I had glued these 2 parts together quite some time ago and then just put them in the box, or the container I'm storing these in, with the white battery box parts that I had also printed. So I finally got around to gluing the 2 of them together. Before I did that, I did some sanding on the top parts to try and get this seam smooth. It's obviously going to take some filler. It's better in some areas than others because there wasn't any real way to line it up other than just I put some tape on the sides and kind of held it and tried to make sure I had it as lined up as I could. So it's not bad, but it'll take a little more sanding than it would if it had been one piece, but I just could not get it to print in one piece and be able to get the support material out of these threaded holes. It just wasn't working for me. And then the battery boxes, if this is going to show the battery boxes around the bottom, which is like a print artifact because of how thick this bottom is. And then, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. There's a thin line, you can see it there probably, that goes around the piece, and if you look there at the edge you can kind of see where it's a bit, you might be able to see where it's a bit recessed, so there'll be some filler that needs to go along that bottom seam. Again, that's not going to be a real big deal, but then I need to sand the whole boxes and fill in material where this piece is glued to the white part and in here with this gap. So that's gonna take some work. This is the same exact thing for this side. This is printed with the spool of silver filament that came with my Prusa printer. This is printed with, I think it was pretty much most of what was left of a marble filament that I had used on a project previously and had some left, so it looks kind of like marble gray with some black specks in it. This shows how this piece eventually ends up. If you look down there, it's got a couple hooks that hook into the foot shell. The foot shell has some recessed areas so that can grab on. There's one thing about this model that I'm not sure if has been fixed or not, but you might be able to see right here where my finger is in the foot shell, there's a semicircular notch there, but there's not in the battery box. The battery box comes down and there's no notch. I believe that's where the wire for the motors comes out, and it should be rounded on the battery boxes, but it isn't. I don't know where I put it, but I did print out. I went into Mesh Mixer and I took part of the battery box from the version 2 R2D2, which is this actual box part is multiple pieces. The Mark III version is all one piece, all the white part. So I took the piece that goes here from the version 2 and I sliced a square out that has the cutout, and I printed it just enough to make a template. And then I put that somewhere, and I'm not sure where it is. I'll find it. I've just got so many boxes of parts right now that I don't know where it is, but I'm going to put it down here, just tape it to this part of the foot shell when the foot shell is off. So yeah, I think I printed in between these two points, and then it has that cutout in it. And so I'll just use a Dremel sanding tool, round sanding drum, and just make that cutout so the wires for the feet can pass through. Again, I'm pretty sure that's what this cutout is for. I haven't looked at the mounting the motors part much yet, but I believe that's why there's this semicircle in the foot shell, but there is not in the battery box. So that's those pieces talked about. And obviously the foot shell still needs to be sanded a bit more. Actually, it doesn't actually need to be sanded. I'm wrong on that. It needs filler. So the next thing to do to this foot shell is put some filler material on it, and then sand the filler material till I'm happy with how smooth the transition from these two pieces is, and then do some primer. Okay, and then we go over to the legs. Made some progress on the legs. I took the horseshoes and I've sanded the sides of the horseshoes. Also this inner lip here I sanded. And this one cut out I sanded. And then I sanded all of these interior ribs I sanded. And so they are all ready for pretty much for primer. The ribs, I don't think I'm going to put any filler before I prime them. I got them pretty good where primer might take care of. It'll take care of almost everything. There might be a few areas that I might add a filler to after I get primer so I can see the contrast better than you can on the white. And then I need to go with filler over the top surface. And then I used 100 grit to sand it smooth here. And so I'll need to do some filler over the tops of both horseshoes, left and right side, before priming them. I glued in these pieces here, these black pieces you can see. Those are to align the horseshoe when you put it on the leg. So you've got 4 magnets in this leg that you can see. And then you've got these pieces of plastic that are alignment pieces. So these pieces of plastic, this one here rests up against this circle, and the ones on the side rest in here, and so it keeps it from moving left, right, or up, down. So it snaps in place, and it has just a tiny bit of movement to it. Just a tiny bit. The other thing I did was initial sanding pass on these. I didn't sand the top because if you look at it like this, you can see that they're angled. So these were flat, so it was pretty much just kind of getting rid of most of the elephant foot where it flares out at the bottom from being on the print bed. Also the same thing on the inside edges, and sanded that semicircle. This part again is an angle, so you've got some stair-stepping artifacts here, some here, which I should have sanded by hand. Now I'm looking at it, but I didn't do that because by the time I finished it was starting to get dark outside. So yeah, this part here, like I was saying, I didn't do any sanding to because it is an angle, and so there's stair-stepping there. So because of the stair-stepping here and here, I figured before I sand anything, I'm going to go ahead and put filler on those areas and then sand the filler down to get it smoother. This is the one-piece version of this booster cover here that comes from the Mark III files. The version 2 R2D2 files, it's I think it's about 7 pieces altogether. These two ends of the legs are separate, so that's 2 pieces. And then I think the middle of this is a 3rd piece, and this is a 4th piece. And then 5, 6, 7, instead of these just being pieces of plastic that slot in, like on this 1-part model. I guess it'd be a 4-part model because 1, 2, 3, 4. But The bottom of this is smooth with the recess for these gray pieces to slot and glue in, whereas the version 2 R2D2 files for this booster, instead of just being these thin individual pieces that slot into a hole, there's a larger kind of rectangular opening that has the part that sticks up, the rib part, and then also a flat part that matches this, the bottom of the booster cover that's kind of inset, which describing it is kind of difficult, but basically instead of just pushing in a thin rib, you're gluing in kind of a plate with the rib that's printed into it for all three. This one is a full circle with a hole that the magnet goes through, and the kind of smiley face piece there is all part of a circle that you glue into the bottom of this for the version 2 file. So I printed the version 1 file on my printer, which is a 300 by 300 millimeter print bed. It just fits diagonally on that print bed. So the advantage, of course, is that it's only one large piece and 3 really small, easy pieces to print instead of 7 pieces that you need to all glue together and make sure they're lined up. So that makes it a little bit less finishing work. It's held in place by magnets as well, 2 magnets. One is right here, and one is in this circle here. So it holds it in. A smiley face keeps it up, but it doesn't keep it from going down. But the magnet pulls it up where it should be. And then those straight pieces keep it from moving left, right. So pretty cool that the leg is starting to look like a leg. Again, I've got a lot of filler work to do there to get it to where I'm ready to prime. And this one also has filler work before I can get it ready to prime, and the battery box is ready. But I feel pretty good that I got some large pieces actually on, lined up right, rough sanding done. So that's some good progress. I'm happy with that. And then the other thing that's even bigger for me, because I've just been dreading it, is the second ring. R2D2's body, ring number 2. Currently the last seam that I glued together is right here. The back panel stretches from here all the way to here, which was the hardest one to glue together because of the way it's cut. It's cut at an angle. The person who took this file, which the Mark III file, again, this is one piece to be printed on a 500 by 500 millimeter print bed all at once. And then somebody was kind enough to cut it into pieces so people with 300 by 300 millimeter print beds could print it. But I don't quite care for the way that it was sliced. As I said, you can see this angle, and it's right next to this piece. So how do you clamp that? If you're clamping it, but it's at an angle. So when you, sorry, camera I think is trying to focus on the board underneath. So if you try and clamp it, the two pieces are just going to want to slide apart because they're at an angle. They're not flat up against each other like the other seams, like this one here, this one here, this one here. The back panel are both angle seams. Also, this back panel does not come off. People are modifying it. I think they do it after they glue it. They end up cutting a section out so you can remove the back panel to get to the electronics, which is standard on the version 2 R2D2, but the original design of this Mark III R2D2 file does not have a removable back. I think it does now have a removable back, at least the one-piece version. I'm not sure if there's a cut version that you can print with a removable back or not. I haven't looked for a while. But yes, gluing these was fairly straightforward. I've got this upside down right now, so you can see these are holes. So there's little bumps on the first row of the body that I've printed. So I put these on the pegs that are in the first row. So the second row lines up with the holes that fit over the pegs. And I fit two pieces together, put glue, and then pushed them together. And actually on this one, I can go ahead and flip it over here. I put a clamp right here, a real strong spring clamp right here that isn't really pushing together. Again, it's all round, so it's hard to figure out where to put a clamp where you can push this together without getting a strap clamp, which is like a tie down for a car where you tie something down with a ratchet strap so the strap goes around and then you tighten it and the whole strap pulls. That's one way to do a round thing, but I just kind of pushed them together as best as I could and then held it for a little while, and then I put a clamp on it, and then it got those pieces that are flat glued together. And then again until it came to these, which are an angle, so, and there's not really much room to get a clamp in there. So when everything was glued together but the back panel, I actually sat out here and held it in place. So there's three different kinds of glues going on here. The first thing I glued were these two pieces, and I used the Welding 16 plastic glue, which I have been using on the project. It pretty much kind of melts the plastic, so the two pieces kind of melt together, and it's fairly strong. I used that here, but I noticed that I did have some gaps, and so I decided, you know what, this is the body, and I think I'd feel better if the gaps were filled. So over here, when I did this part and then this part, I used JB Weld plastic bond 2-part epoxy, and so you can see the brown, so it kind of fills in the gaps between the parts. So I thought that was a better idea there. But then we got, like I said, I got to the back panel, the part that was really worrying me, and how am I going to glue this back panel on when I can't really clamp it? I can't think of a way to clamp it other than, like I said, buying some strap clamps and hoping that they work. But again, even if you're strapping it, there's still a chance with this angle that the pieces are going to want to slide. So I used Gorilla Glue epoxy 5-minute epoxy. Now the 5 minutes is not, it takes 5 minutes to dry. The 5 minutes is basically after you mix it, you have about 5 minutes where it's spreadable. It's supposed to set in about 30 minutes. So what I did was, instead of doing both sides at once, I put glue along one piece here, and then I stuck them together, remembering that this was on top of the first ring, so all the holes of everything are lined up, holding it partially together, with the slight issue being that the holes in this piece for the pegs are something like here and here. They're not at the edges, which is, again, that just happened to be the way the thing was cut. These bumps, I believe, must be in the Mark III files that are all in one piece. So when it was cut, that's just where they ended up. So without a peg and a hole on the ends, these ends were kind of slipping back and forth. So I literally stayed out here and held them like this until as long as I could, basically. So the bottom one, after I left, the bottom one unfortunately did come out a little bit. It was flush when I left the room after half an hour of holding it in place, pushing it up against the other piece. It did come out just a little. It should not be that big of a deal to sand that back so it's flush, and it's on a seam, so it's not going to be like a hugely noticeable thing, although the seam, that does also make the seam open up a little bit wider down there than it should. It's a smaller seam at the top where it went together better. I think because the bottom was on the first ring, it kind of forced it into that circle shape, and so this piece just naturally wanted to come out, whereas the top was easier to put where it belonged, because maybe, like I said, there was a peg here, and so this plastic was just a little, maybe it didn't quite print as curved in as it could have, or in my sanding, maybe I warmed it up and it just had a little spring tension outwards instead of inwards. So here and in the middle, if you look at the inside, down at the bottom and at the middle, I could see that the two parts weren't making good contact, but it was at the top. So I literally sat out here with a thumb pressing as hard as I could here, finger pressing as hard as I could there, and some blue tape around the top and around here, big piece of blue tape, and then kind of watching the top to make sure it didn't move, with my other hand kind of up here. So it was basically it was, well, showing the wrong fingers. It was basically thumb and a finger here, and then another hand up here holding that. And it was a pain in the neck, and I was out here, like I said, for about 30 minutes, which was at set time, and it seemed to be good. So I'm like, okay, my fingers are cramping up, I'm gonna leave. And then when I came back this morning, I noticed that this had come out just a little bit further than it was when I was pushing it in. So should be able to fix that okay. So today I did this one. This morning I did this side, and it was the same thing. Everything was glued together but this seam, but there was still enough, play in the plastic where I could pull it out a bit. So I pulled it out, mixed up some epoxy, used a screwdriver to get it onto the plastic from the back panel. And then again, I was out here. This time I was out here for nearly an hour, pressing as hard as I could on the bottom part and the middle part, and then with the other hand holding the top. And I just hope that it's at least as good as the other side, that it doesn't decide it wants to stick out, pop out more than the other side did. But so far it feels okay. And again, I'm not gonna, it's this is gonna sit all night long until tomorrow, and then depending on tomorrow, because I work the weekends, depends on if I'll do anything. But the next thing to do is weld the seams. I am not going to trust just the glue on this, especially on the back panel. So again, I'm going to take soldering iron and go in the gap between the join between the two pieces, which will make a little furrow and melt some of the two pieces together. And then I'm going to take filament and I'm going to weld the filament into the seam that will make it more strong. On the back panel, because it is right on a panel seam here, where it's supposed to look like the back panel is a separate panel on R2D2, I can't weld that in. Again, because of the way this was cut. It was cut at an angle and right on that seam. So if I weld plastic in there, I'm filling in this seam that's supposed to be there, and then I'm going to have to like completely make that seam from scratch because it'll be filled with filament. There's no way I can do that. So personally, if I had done it, I think I would have maybe cut the piece right here at the end of this square block. So you'd have a flat surface and a flat surface to glue to, and then I might have actually put locator pins. So holes the size of a piece of filament in both pieces, going at least 3 of them in the sides, because none of these sides have them. You just have to put it on the bottom part of the first ring and then just kind of hold it together and make sure that all the holes in the pegs line up and hope that it comes out right. Whereas if you just put some locator pins in there, it would have helped so that you could at least know that your locator pins are lined up, and would have helped it stay together also without the need for hand pressure, just to wait for the glue to set so that it hopefully glues in the right spot. So, but again, I'm not talented enough to do that. I haven't messed with Mesh Mixer enough to make alignment holes or anything, so I couldn't have done any better. And I do appreciate the effort that was taken by the person who did cut the files. But yeah, there we go. That's, like I said, that's kind of funny. Didn't even notice our terribly done rag rolled walls are pretty much the exact same color as the Bondo glazing putty and the and the plastic. Anyway, this is where the R2D2's 2 vents go that will end up with speakers behind them for the sound. These are the large utility doors that the arms come out of. Obviously, these are the start of the shoulder pieces. And this is where the shoulder pieces that hold the hubs slot into. Go down in here, which is something I could actually bring out and see if they line up tomorrow once the glue is all dried, since I do have both shoulders and hubs printed. Yeah, so that's where I'm at now. Again, the last joint of this is gluing, and I wiped the excess glue off here, so when I go over with the soldering iron, it won't be burning too much glue, which is not something you want to smell. I didn't do quite as good a job here, so I might do some light sanding back here before I do the welding, just to get as much of this plastic bond epoxy out of there as I can. And then I'm also going to weld this area here. Only welding the back is good, but if I can weld the back and front, I'd feel even better. So this area, there's a vent that goes in here. So I should have no problem plastic welding in here and then kind of sanding the excess down so it's flush, and then the panel will still fit in there fine, but it'll have the extra strength in this area of welding on the back and the front. And now that I think about that, yeah, that is going to be an issue, because as I said, the shoulder pieces go in here that hold the hubs, and so when I'm welding this, I'm going to have to sand that down smooth too, because the shoulder pieces go down in here. I don't know, I'm assuming they're pretty much going to be flush with this, so I'm going to have to, after doing the welding, I'm going to have to do some sanding to sand that down so that the piece can slide in there. Also on the front, this one here, again, the vent piece sits in here, so if I plastic weld this, then I'm going to have to sand that flush so the vent piece will fit in. And I can obviously weld the backside. That's what the backside looks like. So that'll be no problem welding that. So yes, good progress. Very happy I've got the second ring now glued, or technically gluing. Not quite done with the glue setting. And then the third ring has got the piece with in the front with the arms that come out. That one is going to need a bit of work to be smooth, so I'm not sure if I'm going to go ahead and put the third ring together with the exception of that front piece and wait for that front piece to be last, or just wait to assemble it until I get that front piece done so that I can have the front piece lined up the best. Because obviously, like what I did with this was I started on this side, then I did this side, then I did this back panel. So if this back panel ends up being a bit off, again, after I sand it should be okay, but if it is a little bit off, it is the back panel. So back panel, fairly low on the droid. So of the pieces that would be out of alignment, you'd rather have something in the back that's not really seen be out of alignment than having the very front of R2D2 that you're actually going to be looking at the majority of the time to be out of alignment. So I think I'll probably be waiting until I get more work done on the piece that goes here before I start gluing together the third ring. The weather this weekend is supposed to be up into the 80s Fahrenheit for you folks over the pond. 80 Fahrenheit, upper 70s and 80s. So that's almost too warm to paint possibly, but my hope is, like I said, I work weekend graveyard, so by rights I shouldn't even really be awake right now. But if I can get this thing plastic welded this weekend and then have enough time to take it outside and give it its first coat of primer, I'd be really happy. It pretty much just needs some sanding right now on the seams due to the glue, as well as, like I said, there'll be areas that I plan on plastic welding that I'll need to sand. So after I do the plastic welding and sand down flush, it should be ready for the first coat of primer, because I have done some sanding, and then you can obviously see I've done the first go over it with the Bondo glazing putty that I like to do before I prime it, just because that's the way I started doing it, and it seems to work okay for me, instead of just priming it first and then starting with the glazing putty and the sanding. So hopefully, like the first ring, this will be similar, and it won't be all that much work after that first coat of primer, although this is about twice as tall as the first ring, and it's got a lot more stuff going on with openings and panel lines and everything else. So it could take, well, it will take, no doubt, more sanding on this ring than it took on the first ring, but hopefully it won't be a huge amount. So yeah, there we are today. Good progress made this week. It's nice to see some of my containers of parts emptying out, because I'm starting to put more parts together, and being able to take them out of the box and temporarily, put them together. It's making me think that maybe I'm not going to run out of room. However, once I get something like this all primed and even painted, then I'm just going to have to find room for a whole bunch of large parts instead of a whole bunch of small parts. So we'll see how that goes. But the body actually took one entire large plastic container filled with the parts of ring 2 and ring 3. There was some more room. I could have put other things in it, but it just having them, they're all curved, so just had them all curved, all the pieces for the ring 2 and 3 in a row in one large plastic container seemed to work really good. So now that I've got this, there's only, and the third ring is smaller. This is the tallest ring of the 3. So the third ring isn't as high, I don't think. If I remember that right, it's not nearly as high. So, yeah. So with that, I've got nearly one empty container there that I can maybe store some things that are in cardboard boxes. All the greeblies that go, like the vents that go in here and the pieces that go in these openings. Those are in cardboard empty spool boxes from filament spools. And maybe I can put those inside the plastic container, and that'll free up some shelf space to maybe put some of these bigger parts. But yeah, something to be aware of too if you're printing one of these is it's going to take a lot of space to put all this stuff while you're working on it. So plan for that. Okay, I think that's enough for today.